Hi, my name is Eva Ponce, and in this video I'm going to review SC3x, Supply Chain Dynamics. SC3x is the fourth course as part of the MicroMaster program. So, what did you learn in SC3x? SC3x addresses the main issues and the main challenges when supply chain deal with the real world, when the supply chain are operating in the real world. So there are different learning objectives in SC3x. One of the main objectives in SC3x is to learn how to manage complexity in supply chain and also to understand the drivers of complexity in supply chains. It is also a learning objective in SC3x to understand the supply chain as a process and to learn how to measure the performance of a process in a supply chain. Let's have a look to a simplified way to represent a supply chain. In this simplified figure, we have different actors. We have suppliers, we have the firm, and we have customers. In a supply chain, the firm needs to interact and collaborate with these different actors, with the suppliers and with the customers. And typically, we have many suppliers and many tiers of suppliers. We have many customers, and we can also find here many different actors like wholesalers, distributors, and others. And we need to manage these relationships. If we have a look into the firm, then we are going to mention at least the three main processes. The first process is supplier management processes. These are the processes in charge of source the raw material, the parts and components that we need in a supply chain in order to create and to transform this raw material in final product. If we look into the center of the figure, we have here the internal supply chain management processes. This part of the supply chain in charge of make, move, and store the final products. And in the last part, we have the customer management processes. Those processes in charge of the selling part to sell the product and also in charge of the relationship with the customers. CRM are the customer relationship management information system that helps companies and firms to manage their relationships with their customers. So, when we are talking about supply chains, coordination across the different functions in a supply chain and coordination among the different actors is one of the keys of success in supply chain management. Let me highlight that, coordination. When we are talking about supply chains, we also introduce the bullwhip effect concept. What is the bullwhip effect? Bullwhip effect is when the variability of the demand is higher upstream the supply chain, in this part of the supply chain, than downstream the supply chain. The bullwhip effect, let me highlight that, at the end is a signal of lack of coordination. And this lack of coordination increases the cost of the supply chain, increases the manufacturing cost, the inventory cost, and the transportation cost. So it's something that we need to keep in mind and try to manage this coordination among the different actors and among the different functions and processes in a supply chain. It is also very important to manage the relationships in between the firm and the suppliers and the relationship in between the firm and their customers. We also introduce in SC3x supply contracts. So, we introduce here different types of contracts and different types of relationships in between the firm and their suppliers and their buyers. So, we structure SC3x in two main blocks. In the first part of the course, we mainly review tools and techniques with the H in the middle, tools and techniques that help us to manage and deal with this complexity in supply chains. So we start with supply chain complexity. Supply chain complexity adds cost. And we are talking about complexity when we have many different actors, and the relationship in between these actors are not trivial relationships. We also identify here drivers of supply chain complexity. For instance, the number of products, the variety of these products, the number of interactions that we need to deal with. All of those are sources of complexity in a supply chain. Then we move to process analysis. Here, what we try is to identify the main processes. According to Lambert, there are 7 core processes in a supply chain, and we categorize these processes in internal and external. Internal, those that are completely related with the firm, intra-firm processes, and external, those that deal with the suppliers and the customers. So I really encourage you to review and understand all of these core processes in a supply chain. We also introduce tools for mapping a supply chain, process mapping tool, like flowchart diagrams, swim lane diagrams. So here, these tools are going to help you to understand the workflow in a supply chain and also to understand how a process works in a supply chain. We also introduce some tools to identify the causes of variability in a supply chain. And this is one of the main challenges that we found when we are doing this process analysis, is to deal with this variability. So in this case, we have different tools like the 5 whys. This is one of the tools that we introduced here, the 5 whys, and also these cause-effect diagrams, the fishbone diagrams, Ishikawa diagrams. So let me just include one of these examples of fishbone diagrams. Then we move to system dynamics. In system dynamics, again, we introduce tools and techniques that are going to help us to model and to understand better the complexity in supply chain. So we introduce here feedback loops, causal loops diagrams, stock and flows, and time lags and delays diagrams. And we also introduce the typical system dynamic tools like behavior over time and modeling tools in order to understand better these complex supply chains. Then we move to supply chain strategy, and we introduce here some strategic tools like the well-known Porter's 5 forces. We also introduce the Marshall-Fisher matrix, a 2x2 matrix that match and mismatch the type of product that can be functional or innovative with the right supply chain strategy. Can be an efficient supply chain or a responsive supply chain. And we also introduce here scenario planning tools. Scenario planning tools are appropriate when we want to rethink the supply chain strategy in a long-term timeline. Typically, we use forecasting, and in this case, we use past events in order to predict the future. But this works pretty well in the short or medium term. But if we want to see the effect of different changes, different impacts in our supply chain in the next 10 or 20 years, then we need to use different techniques. And scenario planning tools will help us to define a set of scenarios with different forces, with high impact and high uncertainty, that at the end are like plausible future alternatives that we are going to analyze and to see the impact of these factors in the long-term future of the company. And there are different levels. There are the strategies that we can control. There are the factors that we cannot control, but we can influence, like labor cost. And there are external factors. We do not have any control about external factors. This is, for instance, changes in regulation, or these are, for instance, technological innovations. Those things that happen and we do not have any control, but we need to consider how this is going to impact in my supply chain in the next 10 or 20 years. So then we move to the second part of the course. And in this part, we review the main challenges. So in this part, we mainly focus on the main challenges that we have in supply chain. we started with global supply chains, and we identify here the basic concepts that you need to know in order to understand the trading process in between countries. We are talking here about international commerce. I encourage you to review the landed cost analysis and understand each part of this formula and review the process of how to calculate this landed cost analysis. We also review international transportation and the well-known Incoterms. These are the international commerce of chamber terms that companies are using in international trading. And we also review the main challenges in international transportation, the pros and cons of using different modes of transportation like air, ocean, or road transportation. And we also review the main ways to make the main payment methods in global supply chain. Then we move to risk management and resilience. And here we focus in techniques and tools that help us to identify the risk, to identify the causes for this risk, the main mode of failures that we have here, and also we review the resilience fundamentals, mainly flexibility, redundancy, and readiness, to be ready for the event. And at the end of the course, we went through the exogenous factors and regulations. And here we introduced the STEEP framework. This is the social, technological, economic, environmental, and political framework. This framework helps us to analyze these different impacts in a supply chain. And we also review the impact of regulations in the supply chain. So I hope you enjoy SC3x and best of luck.